Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. My name is Heather, and on this channel we like to walk a very fine line between a shopping addicted makeup monster and a responsible adult with a makeup hobby. Now, I really enjoy eyeshadow singles, duochromes, multichromes, blush, highlight, lip gloss, basically everything except pressed glitter, and today we're going to be doing a ranking of all of my pastel palettes. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, stick with me, we're getting into it right now. So I have with me 14 pastel, or predominantly pastel palettes that I want to kind of rank for you guys today. So we're going to start at the bottom and work our way to the top as per usual. So coming in at number 14 is the Wet n Wild Care Bears collab palette, and this comes from a friend of mine. So Brie, if you are watching, thank you so much for this palette. The reason why I tend not to use this one too much is because there are 3 pressed glitters in it, and when I think about going into this palette, all I think about is like, I'm going to need to pull other palettes in order to make this one work. So for me, I just tend to kind of avoid using this palette, and for that reason, it came all the way to the bottom. Coming in at number 13 is the Unicorn Cosmetics Angel palette, and this was the first palette that I picked up from their brand, and then I went back and picked up a second palette later, but I love the color story. The color story itself I think is great. I love these sort of like blurply purple shades. I like the sort of soft pinks that are in here. All of these kind of chartreusey and, you know, olivey greens I think are really, really pretty, but the metallics in here are not great. They're very like private label. They smell like some kind of very private label formula. I don't know if it's the glue or what, but like I've had this palette for I think like 2 years maybe, and I can still smell that smell when I open it, which is kind of frustrating for me. So even though I love it, I love the packaging, like I think it's such an innovative design and everything with all these split pans down the center, I'm very frustrated by the fact that it smells and it doesn't have a very good quality. Next up is the Odens Alva 2 palette, and this is their sort of take on a pastel palette. Now, I sort of think this is a pastel / brights hybrid palette, but it falls lower because of the 2 pressed glitters. I just am not a pressed glitter person. When I buy palettes with pressed glitters in them, I tend not to use them as much as palettes that I know don't have them. Even if the shades I would otherwise use are not pressed glitters, I still just don't go into the palettes that often. So this one ranked a lot lower for that reason. I will say props to Odens though, because when they got the feedback that people didn't like pressed glitters, they have not released a single product with pressed glitters since, which is awesome. But this one falls pretty low for that reason. The next one is sort of like a 2-for-1 that we're going to talk about, and this is the Colourpop pastel collection that they did. There was 3 palettes originally, and I condensed them down into 2 palettes here. And the reason that I did that is because I wanted to get rid of all the pressed glitters. So I had pressed glitters in some of my other 9-pan palettes and in these. And so I basically condensed 9 of those into the sort of orangey pastel palette that came with these 2 and got rid of that one, and then just kept the sort of matte and metallic shades. And they are decent. They're like soft powdery. The metallics are fine, but it's like, it's just fine. So it's coming down closer to the bottom for that reason. Next up is the 90s Dance Remix palette, and this is from BH Cosmetics. And again, this is sort of like a pastel brights kind of a palette, ignoring the neutrals, of course, because you guys know I'm not like super neutral. But I like the colors that are in here. I think the quality of the mattes in this palette are very nice. The metallics are just like standard metallics, so they're not super special or dynamic. But because this one is kind of limited, I don't tend to go back into it very often. I definitely think the collector mentality is part of why I bought this in the first place, so it kind of falls down for that reason. All right, and next up is the Spring Dragon palette from It's Judy Time and Odens, and this one is one of their new launches. If I remember correctly, there's a video on my channel with this, but it's been rough recently. This palette I think is nice, but these colors are really, 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 really softly pigmented. And so for me, even though I am part ghost, I still find it difficult to get these colors to sort of show up. And I'm talking about like these shades specifically. The sort of pinky tone shades and the brown in here are fine. And the metallics in here are very nice. This shade is probably my favorite in the entire palette. But the pastel sort of shades that they picked are just, they're so pastel. I don't know how this would work on medium or deeper skin tones. So coming in, I think at number 8 is going to be the Glamlite Ice Cream Dream palette. And this is one of the first like big pastel palettes that I had. I think I also had the Morphe, was it Icy Fantasy around this time? So, but I've since decluttered that one. And particularly it's kind of like the pastel shades down here. These are definitely more the intense shades. And then you have all these pretty metallics in here. I really gravitate to the green, blue, purple, pink kind of aspect of this palette and not so much the pink and brown that's kind of at the top here. In general, I think the colors are quite nice. Glamlite's formula is definitely more pigmented, so you can definitely get it to show up on a variety of skin tones, which I think is excellent. But for me, there's just something about the color story that's still kind of missing. I think it's the fact that there's nothing really deep to sort of balance this all out. And so it leaves me kind of like lacking when I go into this palette, so I don't go into it super, super often. I'm not a huge pastel person to begin with. Like, I mean, obviously I'm sort of giving goth vibes here today. That's not generally my style either, but I'm not a huge pastel person. I do think it's pretty and it has its time and place, and I do like enjoy sort of the soft looks that other people do, but when I tend to do super soft looks on myself, it looks almost unfinished, and I tend to want a little bit more depth and intensity in my eye look to sort of make it look a little bit more well-rounded. Next up is the Whatever Girls My Melody palette, and this is one of the Rom&nd palettes that I got with the Karomi, I think is the other palette. I like this palette. Again, it just suffers from the fact that it is really, really softly pigmented, and when I use just these shades, it's not enough to give me the depth to sort of leave me satisfied that I've made a complete eye look. And so while I like the shades, I like the formula, I'm missing depth, and that's why this one kind of ranks in the middle of the road. Then I have this cute little Colourpop Just a Glitch palette. This is from their, was it the 2000s collection that they did? But this one is like mints and sort of lavender purple shades. And I think it's a really pretty color story in general. Again, it just lacks depth. You only have the two mattes there, so I feel like it's sort of limiting. But the colors themselves I think are quite nice, which is why it came up to number 6. Coming in at number 5 is the Sugar Crystals palette from Violet Voss, and you could definitely argue that this is pastels and brights because you have these sort of iridescent row, the sort of pastel row, and then your bright shades. I do really like this palette. The colorful looks that I've done with this palette I really appreciate, and I do like dipping into this palette to sort of complement other eye looks that I've put together with other palettes. So this one is very versatile to me, and that versatility is part of what brought it all the way up as high as it did. Coming in at number 4 for similar reasons is the Sugar Dreams palette from Sugar Drizzle, and this one is just a 9-pan topper palette, and I think all these shades are very like soft in general, very pastel washes of color, kind of that candy, cotton candy vibe, and I think that is quite nice. For me, because it's not a complete color story, it didn't rise all the way to the top, but I think it is so versatile to add to some of these other palettes, so it did come up to number 4. Coming in at number 3 is an oldie but a goodie. This is the Nomad Tokyo Harijuku palette, and I think this one is on clearance right now at Nomad's website. So if you were like super down for it, you might want to get your hands on it while you still can because it's being retired. But I think this is a pretty color story. I love the shades down here, and this was sort of my first introduction to those like squishy duochrome kind of formulas. And I think I have a little bit of hard pan in some of these, so I wish it didn't hard pan, but otherwise I think it's a great color story, and I like that they included this sort of deeper gray shade so that you had something to blend all these into to give yourself a little bit of depth and contrast rather than just everything being light, light, light the whole way through. Coming in at number 2 is the Colourpop Pretty Guardian Sailor Moon palette, and it looks like this. And again, it's this very like cool toned pastel color story. I like that they added this deep purple in here, which even in the pan doesn't look super dark, but on the eyes I think it gives enough depth to balance out some of these other really light mattes that are in here. And I like the metallics that they picked out. I think you have some that lean more like golden peachy kind of shades, some that lean more blue, which I think is quite nice, and then you have this nice duochrome down here. It's a pretty concise color story, which I appreciate. So overall I brought it all the way up to number 2 for that reason. And then coming in at number 1, I don't think anybody could argue, but this is the Sickly Sweet palette from Blend Bunny Cosmetics. And I think the reason why this one works so well is that not only do you have all these beautiful pastel shades, but you do have the deeper shades that she includes to sort of balance everything out and still give yourself some depth, even if you're not going all the way to like jet black, although this one gets pretty close. It's nice that some of the shades in here have kind of a bright bend to them, and some are just really soft, like light, almost white kind of shades. My personal preference, I much prefer her gradients rather than this sort of like scrambled up view of this palette. I know she was trying to do that because it looks like a bowl of candy or whatever. I get it, but I am so partial to her rows. They're just so pleasing to look at. So that's the only critique that I have on this palette, but this one definitely had to come up to number one. All right, and with that said, that is everything for this video. Definitely a quick one, but you know, like I said, I'm not a huge pastel person, so the fact that I have 14 pastel palettes is already just excessive. But let me know in a comment down below, what are some pastel palettes that you really like in your collection? Is there something that I should be trying that I haven't yet? I would definitely appreciate the feedback. I want to thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe before you go, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!